If you're a millennial or a Gen Z, I think you would comfortably say that the cost of living is dramatically more expensive than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. Especially the housing market. If you're anybody who's even at least a little bit optimistic and ambitious enough to want a house somewhere near the future, you have definitely looked up the prices of houses and come to a soul crushing realization that you will not be able to afford a house anytime soon. Now, what about rent? What about a two-bedroom apartment? What about the utilities? What about the car insurance? What about everything else beyond housing? How have those stacked up in comparison to what it was back then, and especially with how little people are getting paid nowadays? We will, of course, be reacting to some TikToks posted on TikTok, of course, going over some people's cost of living.
The cost of living in this country is currently, it's not going to be, it is currently unsustainable. And there are people that they know this, but then they'll still look at somebody else that's struggling and then tell them they're not doing good enough. I want you to imagine somebody that makes $75,000 a year. That's a pretty high up wage in terms of like top earners in this country, $75,000 a year. And we're going to go through some things here. This is a person with no debt outside of a car. And please don't hit me with the, you can go buy a car for, shut up, you can't, shut up, stop saying ridiculous things. An entry-level decent car is $30,000. So this person
On the used marketplace
$200
currently is $2,500.
5% into their 401k, because shut up, people should be able to put money into their retirement. Because if you're not doing it now, you're never going to get to start doing it later.
Exactly.
So after those two things come out of their paycheck, and their taxes are paid, they bring home $53,850 a year from a $75,000 paycheck. Average rent in my state for a one-bedroom apartment, because an adult should be able to live by themselves, $1,700.
That's
car
crazy.
Payment at 6%
$1,700?
for an entry-level, very reasonable sedan, nothing fancy. A car payment's $579 a month. Car insurance, $240 or so.
Car insurance is ridiculously expensive for no reason.
You're a young person, you've got a nice job, but the insurance companies still want to screw you over. Food. You only cook at home. You never, ever go out. You only cook at home, and you only eat decent quality food, because a human being should be allowed to eat decent quality food. You pay $870
Okay, yeah.
for that.
I think that's a little bit
$250
expensive, but okay, we could do that.
You wear and tear on your car, $100 a month. $80 for your phone, $80 for your internet, $175 a month for your electricity, $70 for your water, $20 for your cash. You make 75 grand a year, and outside of a car payment, you have zero debt. Do you know how much money you have left over annually at a $75,000 wage? You do nothing. You don't own a Netflix. You don't go out on a date. You don't pay to go to a park. You don't go watch a movie. You do nothing. If you can't find it on the internet for free, you don't get to do it. If you can't cook it at home for your $800, you don't get to do it. You have $3,700 left over annually.
So $3,700. That's crazy.
And there's going to be, well, that's $300. Shut up. Shut your stupid, contrarian, edgelord mouth. That's not a doctor bill, because God knows, just because we have insurance doesn't mean that we don't still pay far out the ass when we go to the doctor.
Yeah.
People like to be entertained. They want to date. They want to. There's those of you out there that will tell somebody living like this on $75,000 a year before taxes that they are not doing what they're supposed to do, that they should get a second job, that they should get a side hustle, that they should get a better job. And the fact that you would look at somebody with no debt other than a car and say something like this to them means, objectively, you're a moron and you live in a fantasy world. This is unsustainable.
And I actually like his perspective, right? Because a lot of people do have a ton of contradictory points, like trying to debate these kind of people. And we will go over one person like that at the end of the video, just to give some contrasting points. But this is $75K a year annually for a single person. That is not the average amount that somebody makes. I believe the average salary in America is $50K, but most people make about $40K, $35K. So what are they supposed to do except for just ball up and cry? Even if somebody at $40K got a partner who's also making $40K, that's $80K. That's $5,000 more than a $75K annual salary is for a single person. And so, you know, the car insurance also doubles. the food also doubles, the gas also doubles. So even though you can't just add that person's savings to that because things cost more, I think you will save a little bit more on rent. That is the biggest saver right there, would be rent, or it would be your mortgage if you have a house, which, by the way, if you're making $80K, I doubt you'll find a mortgage at a decent rate. It should be about $2,000. Yeah, I believe it's about $2,000 a month, and that's including, your principal and interest and also everything else that falls underneath that for your mortgage to live comfortably. So even with two people, that's still extremely expensive. And it's really weird when you compare to, TV shows back in the days where you see, a more so dumb man who is able to provide for his entire family. Let's just think about it. You have The Simpsons, you have Family Guy, you have Modern Family. Actually, I don't know. I'm capping out of my ass after the first two, but still, you still have two examples right there of a single income family who's able to afford a really nice house. And back then, a 2-story tall house like something in The Simpsons would be considered a starter home. And I know this for a fact because I believe the Simpsons creators said themselves that was a starter home. Never mind, I'm looking it up. I think I'm capping out of my ass. But regardless, I do believe that at the time that it wasn't the most luxurious house for them that they could buy, especially if you look at some of I believe it was the Sears homes. Yeah, I'm looking at a catalog of Sears homes, and these are really nice, really well crafted, really complex looking houses, and way different from the cookie cutter copy and paste houses that you see nowadays. Okay, I think I've been focusing too much on houses, so let me go ahead and get back to the video. Here's a commenter who says, my parents made 60 all throughout my childhood. We had a beautiful house, new cars, a camper, 2 vacations a year. Now I make double that, and just paying rent is a struggle. Something is broken. And as we all know, you can ask anybody who lives in a specifically more so expensive city, and people will say that living in a city is a luxury, but let's not ignore the fact that people back then were living in the same cities that we are now. But you can ask anybody who lives in one of these current cities how much they make. They can give you a ridiculously high number, like $140K, and you're living in California. Well, you couldn't really afford a house over there, especially in some specific areas. It is hard to look at some of these facts and look somebody in the eye and tell them that the American dream isn't dead. It's unrealistic.
It's not the overspending, it's the cost of living. Here is a breakdown of the average Gen Z and millennials' cost of living in today's world. So number one is rent. Everyone knows that Gen Z and millennials have to have a roommate. So splitting a 2-bedroom apartment with utilities is around $1,500. If you have a car, a
that's more like it.
$15,000 used car is still going to run you $400 a month. Car insurance and gas is another $300. Student loan payment, $500. You're going to have groceries for $500. You're going to have personal care, doctor's appointments, hair, gym, about $150, and then cell phone and miscellaneous $150. That's $3,500 a month, which is baseline. Do you know how much $3,500 a month is? $70,000 a year, or $34 an hour. Because after you take out taxes, put $300 for health insurance, and do a healthy $500 401k contribution, that leaves you at $3,500. This is no fun, no savings, no maintenance, no clothes, no kids, no traveling, no vacations, no bachelor parties, no weddings, no funerals, no clothes, no school supplies, nothing. And this is paycheck to paycheck. And on top of it, they're holding $40,000 of student loan debt, a $15,000 car, and if they ever wanted to buy a house with closing costs and the down payments, another $50,000. So they need $105,000. So even if they were somehow able to scrounge up after $70,000 of paycheck to paycheck, $5,000 to go to a concert, to have avocado toast, whatever it is, $5,000 a year, it would take them 20 years to pay off this debt and save up for a house. 20 years of living with the roommate where that rent's going up, and they're making $70,000 a year as a college graduate. The average person in this country makes $50,000. It is not the overspending. It is a cost of living crisis.
And that's crazy because I make right around that $3,500 to $4,000 a month range. And I don't even think that, realistically speaking, if I moved out, I couldn't live anywhere but in an apartment. And I don't have any student loans. I don't have a car payment. I don't have none of that, which thankfully for me, because that means I have more in my savings per month, but still. And this is a more affordable, more cheaper breakdown than in the other video. Even though he said that he was splitting rent, I doubt that you're actually spending $3,000 a month on rent unless if you're living in an extremely expensive city. Because, for example, I live in the DFW area. I believe nowadays a one bedroom should be around 1,200, higher end 1,700. So average would be 1,500, right around that 1,500 range. But then again, I even asked some of my friends who don't have a job like I do, who don't make significantly as much as I do, and they would tell me that they could not be able to afford to move out even with their partner. A commenter says, and those expenses are if you have $0 in credit card debt, which, as you can tell by my other video, I am very heavily against overspending on your credit card. Please do not play with your credit card. Your credit card is there to help you out in the future. Don't take advantage of it. Don't treat it like it's free money, and it will treat you nicely. Working at Walmart, I barely make $20K a year, let alone $50K. And that is the harshest reality of this. I believe Walmart is one of the biggest employers in the entire nation. So the fact that the biggest employer in the entire nation is paying their employees just around $20K a year goes to show how bad the economy is and how bad rent prices really are. Can we please go back to $800 rent?
Y'all can read this for yourselves. There is not one U.S. state where working 40 hours a week is enough to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. That is sad. That is so ridiculously sad. And the other day I heard an elderly woman talking about something. These younger folks don't know what working hard is. As someone who had 3 jobs in college while being a full-time college student, y'all are really checked out with reality right now. Like, everything is too expensive. I went to the store the other day. 1 bottle of Sprite and a bag of Doritos. Guess how much? $5.50 for 1 bag of chips. The bag wasn't even huge. It was around like one of those dollar-sized bags. If you knew back in like 2010, those dollar-sized.
Oh, I was gonna say the big bag of chips by themselves, they're like $6.
16 ounce.
That's where I was a little confused. I think the 16 ounce would be like what, like $2?
The prices of a 2-bedroom apartment. I think the lowest you can get is probably like $1,200. The lowest you can get.
I need to know where he's finding these 2-bedroom apartments for $1,200. At least where I'm at, when I look around, I'm seeing the bare minimum, the very bottom, the very lowest of the lowest ends. I'm seeing $1,700. I am not finding $1,200. So please point to me where, he's finding these. And I don't know where this statistic is coming from. I don't know. When they say there's not one U.S. state where working 40 hours a week is enough to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, I don't know what kind of salary they're basing that off of. If they're basing that off of the median salary that everybody makes or what, but and that's not even considering the fact that when you apply for an apartment, most of the time, the apartments are going to want you to make at least 3 times the rent. So I guess that would make sense if the rent is $1,800 and they want 3 times that. Let's do some quick math. $5,400. Boom. That was quick math off the top of my head, but I had to do a jump cut because I took a moment there, so you guys are going to think I'm going to use a calculator. But quick math, $5,400 a month. But yeah, no, $5,400 a month. You are making really good money at that point because if you remember the other video, they were saying how $3,500 to $4,000 is around $75K a year, obviously before tax. So that's your gross salary, not your net salary, but still. I believe if you want to make net $100K, you need to make $140K gross salary. So just to put some perspective out there. Yeah, no, like I was saying, I really don't know what statistic this graph is using, but I probably believe it. Here's a commenter by Steve from Minecraft who says, must be nice when boomers could work 40 hours, afford a home, 2 cars, a stay-at-home wife and kids, take family vacations all on 1 income, but yet people working 60 hours can't afford an apartment. Me personally, I work 50 hours, but now they're cutting off overtime. So yes, I get affected too. So right now I'm working 40 hours a week. But yeah, no, it is really insane looking at how things were back then and, comparing it to now. A lot of people were saying that you might be pessimistic or you're overspending a lot of your money, but there's a reality to these kind of things. Objectively, you can't look at how much you could buy back then and compare to now and not say that there isn't a huge difference. Oh, you gotta help your parents out with rent at least a little bit, or at least pay a bill. Why is a gym that expensive? Okay, so I think it'd be a little bit easy to make fun of this person, right? 32-year-old. Okay, we can all agree that we should definitely make fun of him because he's not giving his parents at least any rent or any kind of utilities, right? But I guess there is a bigger message behind this. Maybe not if you're in your 30s, but at least if in your 20s, right? If you're a young adult, if you can live with your parents, definitely live with your parents because you save a lot of money just right off the bat right there. You can put that into your savings account. That way, whenever you do eventually move out, you can either find a better job in the meantime. You save up your money so whenever you do move out, if anything bad was to happen, you'd be able to afford that. And on top of that, you know, your mom and dad might appreciate that. That is considering you live in a healthy lifestyle, because that's something that most people don't take into consideration. Not everybody's home life is perfect. So there's a lot of variables to this kind of stuff. You know, it's not just a consistent streamlined path. You know, you don't just get your grandpa's house inherited to you. You know, some people are immigrants. Some people don't have grandpas that were in the United States at that time. They're over in another country. So, you know, you don't have a house to inherit there or anything like that. Everybody starts off at a different point. Everybody ends at a different point. So that definitely adds to the conversation at hand.
The short answer is that time is over with. And unfortunately, the circumstances that created an economy where you could live off of a single income no longer exist. Now, those times might be able to come back, but the important thing to understand is that the circumstances that created the United States economy from 1945 to 1973 were extremely exceptional, and they no longer exist today. For starters, America was unrivaled in industrial output following the end of the Second World War, because it was one of the few industrial nations that wasn't completely bombed, such as Germany, Great Britain, as well as Japan. For that reason, we had very few competitors when it came to industrial production for several years. Another grim but true fact is that if you lose a large portion of your population, especially if they are working age, well, that increases demand for workers, which increases wages. And we lost.
I've actually never put that into thought,
War.
actually.
Therefore, wages were more competitive, and for that reason, workers were paid better. This is all happening on top of the fact that the United States went through a socialist movement in the 1920s and 30s that created things such as the New Deal, things such as workers' protections, and there was more unionization. For that reason, workers negotiated their wages more, which again made life better for the working and middle class.
Could you imagine
Another
negotiating
factor
your
at play
pay
here was
nowadays?
that
God.
people in power back then, in politics,
You'd be lucky to
and
even
in
have a
business,
job in the first
they
place.
understood the importance of investing in the American people. One, because they wanted to defeat communism in the Soviet Union. Therefore, they were going to make America the best country in the world so that the Soviet Union would not be more appealing, so that communism would not creep its way into the United States. Another thing was understanding that what gave rise to fascism in places like Italy and in Germany was, generally speaking, a disgruntled working and middle class. A great deal of fascists became more sympathetic to Nazis because they were frustrated by the failures of the Weimar Republic in Germany. So there was more incentive to basically subsidize the working and middle class in the United States, because people back then understood that if they didn't do that, then people would rise up against them. Not only did corporations invest more in their own workers, but also in the American people by paying higher taxes, which provided greater social services, but more regulations were put in place to help limit the control of corporations in the 1930s and onward.
No, let's actually talk about that for a moment, right? As you were saying, you know, the employees basically had a lot more power back then because the companies wanted to win the employees over. But nowadays, it's the opposite. We have too many people. We have too many different kind of stuff that goes against us that companies can leverage in their own way, to where it makes having a job more important than the specific job that they pick. This leads to companies having more power, which leads to more competitiveness in specific fields, which means that they can decrease the pay there, and it leads to other jobs kind of matching that kind of pay, because if everybody kind of pays around about the same, then what can you really do? It's kind of crazy. If you really look into it, you'd be surprised by the amount of jobs that seem like they pay more, that pay a lot less and a lot more similar to these more lower end jobs.
Things such as limiting stock buybacks, or limiting the amount of money that you could donate to politicians, or lobbying. And fast forward to today, most of those regulations no longer exist or are no longer enforced. Today, it's not so easy. American industry has a lot more competition. Other countries have started to catch up to us, not just in industry, but also in education as well, providing high-value workers that Americans have to meet. When it comes to wages, American wages have largely not kept up with inflation because workers are less organized than they used to be. And usually, if you want to be effective at maintaining consistent wages, then you need to unionize. A great deal of subsidies and social services that existed in the past no longer exist for the working and middle class because the United States spent an exorbitant amount of money on foreign wars in Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, and in order to pay for those, they've decided to abandon certain social services and defund certain things like education. So not only is the deficit going up because of these wars, but it's actually being made worse by the fact that taxes are being lowered, especially for the most wealthy. And for that reason, there's a greater deficit, which means that services that do remain in place are often working less effectively. Consumption's also up. We purchase a lot more than we used to, and the prices of these goods come from private companies, which means that the prices go up every single year or every single quarter. For that reason, we are spending more. So to answer your question, work is more competitive than it used to be, laborers are less organized, therefore they are paid less than they used to be, consumption is up, which is raising the cost of living, and social services and general subsidies that help maintain a healthy working class are no longer in existence. For that matter, when it comes to serving the interests of the people, the government, because of deregulation, is largely now in service to corporations and the upper class, not the middle and lower classes, which has made it more difficult to live a type of life where you can live off of one income in an entire household.
And that's really crazy because if you really do look at the wealth distribution, it is insane. Specifically, I keep bringing it back up on this channel, right? But it really is a turning point in our nation, the pandemic. If you really see everybody's saying how the GDP is a lot better now, how the economy is doing a lot better, right? But if you actually really go into the graphs and you really look into it, the top 1% has been going up, but the bottom 99% has stayed the same, if not worse, than ever before. And he talked about how there was a lot more regulations back then. And don't even get me started with unions. In a perfect world, unions should not even be a thing. And I know that unions have a ton of problems. But with that being said, the best job I've ever had was me at UPS when there was a union. The fact that we were able to negotiate our own kind of stuff. I was there around the time where everybody at UPS got a pay increase. And that was absolutely crazy. For the time, that pay was really good. But now we have union busters and all that kind of stuff, which even prevents people and organizations like that from even starting up, which I think is completely backwards. But I mean, what can you really do, man?
So I came across this. It says, this is the max rent you should be paying based upon your salary. Now, just so you guys know for reference, the average American makes about $49,000, which means your rent should be about $1,041. But here's the thing. The average of a one-bedroom apartment in the United States right now is $1,700. That's damn near a 70% increase, okay? Now, one thing I am happy about is that the feds are suing certain rent companies for hiking up prices and gouging renters. That's a good thing. But ultimately, the rent is just too damn high. I know in California, we have a ballot measure that talks about rent control. And people are saying, you don't want to have rent control because builders will be too shy to build. Man, forget that. We need rent control because the rent is too damn high. And what I can clearly see is that a lot of major companies are taking advantage of people, hiking up the rent, and trying to squeeze people. And that's just not cool. Everybody should be able to make a profit in the United States. But gouging your fellow countrymen ain't right. That's not cool. So I'm hoping that this bill in California passes and we can get some rental relief for people that need it in terms of capping what they can go up to after your lease is done. Because I think about my mom who just lost her husband of 46 years. If I and my brother wasn't there, my mom would be looking at this price and she can't afford that.
And looking at this chart, it's very easy to see how 75, 80K back in the days used to be considered middle class because the rent back then for, let's say, a 2-bedroom was $800 or even 1-bedroom was $800. And now if you look at this, a 40K salary, you can afford an $800 apartment. So you can see how when two people got together with that 40K salary and was able to afford the rent needed for an 80K salary, you can definitely see how that would be more middle class. And especially with houses back then, not only having a lower interest rate and at the same time also costing less overall, you can definitely see how your money was worth a lot more. And you can see how ridiculous 100K really is. You can only afford $2,000, almost $100 worth of rent. Now, what mortgage what you find for 2,100. You can definitely find some out there, but will it be the prettiest houses? Absolutely not, especially when now the target would be around 400K, not even 300K. Because God, I remember when I was in high school and I was looking into houses, some of the best, most luxurious looking houses, at least on my block at the time, was worth around that 300,000 range. Right now, I am looking right at that $300,000 range, maybe a little bit less. I think my preferred target would be 260, but like, let's get real here. I'm never gonna find 260. But yeah, no, it's crazy. Even at 80K, $1,666, that would be a 1-bedroom apartment. That would not be a 2-bedroom. Let's get to 2 bedrooms. You would need at least 90K minimum. Realistically, 100K for a 2-bedroom apartment. So that means both partners would have to be making the average salary, which is extremely hard because most people don't even make that much. That is the average. That is in the median. It really is 875. What? No, because I remember back in the day, you used to give the little quarters, right? It would be like what, like maybe $2? You put the little quarters in. There was like a little vending machine where you could put in money and you can get the little quarters out. Why 875? How many quarters is that? 4, 8, 12, 16, 17, 18, 19. You got 19 quarters right there. That's almost 20. That's crazy. And that's not even ignoring the fact that, if you try to go for a more affordable rent place, right? Like, you find an apartment complex that's pretty affordable, right? That's within your budget. Most of the time, it probably won't have, a washer and dryer. You would have to spend a little bit more for that washer and dryer to already be coming inside of that apartment. But I'll tell you this much, whoever is the owner of this laundromat is probably making a lot more than your average laundromat. I don't know if that's a good price for, I don't know if that's the average price for laundromats, but $875 is ridiculous. He is absolutely farming these people.
Sorry, but I don't agree with the whole idea that the cost of living is that much higher today than it was like 15 years ago. I do want to clarify, I'm not talking about housing. That situation's insane. But when it comes to the cost of living for everything else, I think Americans are just way too used to a ton of mini luxuries that we all have now that people just don't want to give up. I'm talking about things like $2,000 iPhones, streaming subscriptions, meal delivery. There are things like Amazon Prime and other subscriptions like that. And of course, everyone now takes a supplement or multiple supplements. Those cost money. And then the cosmetic things that people do because everyone is seen so much on social media rather than in real life. A lot of the people who need to live on a strict budget, they're just not willing to. Not to mention, the people who are struggling or say they're struggling when it comes to cost of living, these are the kind of people that would find a way to struggle in the perfect economy, like the best economy we've ever had. These people would still find a way to struggle. I'm just not willing to be gaslit into believing that things are as bad as people claim. Now, is it worse? Yeah, probably. But again, I don't think it's as bad as people claim. And no, this doesn't come from a place of privilege. I grew up poor. I was broke as an adult. I know what it's like.
I don't know if I can necessarily agree with this dude just basically on the fact that he said excluding housing. Housing basically is a majority of your paycheck. And if you can't afford your housing, okay, so let's go down, right? Housing takes up a huge chunk of your monthly paychecks, right? And then you have to pay off everything else, right? Utilities, food, gas, all of that, right? You already know. Let's say you have kids, right? That means you're only left with a little bit, right? And if you are spending that little bit on DoorDash, then I would say that's your fault. But let's be realistic here. Not everybody is dumb enough to struggle and also pay for DoorDash like that. I mean, come on, that's just a little bit ridiculous. Now, if he is talking about those specific people, then I would agree. But he's kind of talking in a way where it's kind of generalizing how everybody does it, how everybody pays for Netflix, everybody pays for dumb things that, they can't necessarily afford. And I mean, I agree that a lot of people do that. But there's more people who try to do things the right way. But I don't know. If you guys agree with him, let me know your opinions down below. But I think I'm going to leave the video at that. If you guys enjoyed today's video, don't forget to leave a like. And of course, subscribe if you are enjoying this content. But without further delay, I think I will end that video here. I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye.